What's your why? Should I look at the camera or look straight here? What's your why?
Now it's good to talk to people.
Okay. You know, another thing is, what's your why? Everybody has a reason of something that drives them, propels them to move forward. Some is either from fear or from motivation. Some people have had poverty in their family. Some people just wanted to change the entire trajectory of their family. You know, for me, it was being doubted, being overlooked. You know, a lot of people were betting against me and thought I couldn't make it. A lot of people laughed at me. They laughed at my goals and things like that. And I got a lot of doors that were closed in my face. That added fuel to my fire. That's what kept me going. That's what kept me motivated to move forward. And I never forget what that was like. Don't you ever forget what it is that is your why, is your reason to move forward. You know, the earliest example of that I could give you is that I got kicked out of high school and I got sent to a secondary school. And what happened was that in secondary school, in order to graduate, you got to do a stack of paper like this thick in order to graduate. And so my mom went up to the school and talked to the teacher, and she said, "Do you think my son is going to graduate?" And the teacher looked at my mom and said, "You know, I've never seen it." He said, "I've been working in this career for 30 years and I've never ever seen that." And so my mom came home. She was furious. She had rage and fire in her eyes. And she was like, "He said he been working there 30 years and he ain't never seen that happen." I was like, "I'm gonna do it, Mom." And my mom just looked at me like, and guess what? I stayed there every single day because there was doubt in there. You see the doubt? I took that doubt and it fueled my fire, and I just stayed there doing a homework assignment. Now I was smoking a little weed, to keep it honest. I was keeping 100. I was smoking a little weed, but no matter what it took, day in and day out, I did that whole stack of paperwork. And I was 17 years old, 16, 17 years old. So it was at that age that I knew that I was different. And guess what? I walked across the stage and I graduated. Graduated across the stage and got my diploma. That's when I knew that I was different from everybody else. And I used that. So use whatever it is that you got, whatever that propels you, no matter what it is, use that. You know, the truth is that I became a millionaire in my mind before I did it on paper. I already knew that I was going to become super successful. The only thing that needed to happen next was I needed to know, well, how? How am I going to do this? What's the strategy? And then the next question was when. And every single thing that I did, I walked towards a path to get there. I didn't look no other direction. There was not a doubt in my mind. I'm gonna switch up out. I'm gonna switch my jacket, bro.
That's really good.
I lived under a bridge like a troll, you know? Under the bridge, we just used to see cars come by and stuff like that. I did that for 2 or 3 days, man, living under a bridge. You know, homeless at my very, very worst, you know? And a few years later, I was a millionaire. You know, I don't say that to brag. You know what I'm saying? I say that as you can come from any place and rise yourself up to the highest level, no matter what it is. You could come up from any place and rise yourself up to the highest level, no matter what it is, no matter what you've been through. You know, I remember some days sitting there eating cup of noodles, eating top ramen noodles from 99-cent store. You know, from that to traveling first class, having hundreds of thousands in my bank account, buying properties overseas. I all did that with my mind. Nobody came up to me and handed it to me. I didn't have no rich uncle in the family. That's why I be telling people, just do whatever it is that you need to do to propel to get yourself to those next goals. And credit is, in this country, is a real, real big one. And that's why I fell in love with it. That's why I teach it to the masses.
All right, you can probably hard switch. Action.
I remember a time when I didn't have no place to go. I was in my homeless era, and I remember walking around looking for a place to sleep all night. And I walked around this park. The park was dark, and I seen some homeless people all around. I was like, nah, I ain't go. I'm gonna try to find my own spot. So I remember I didn't find nowhere that was out of the way in the curb or nothing where I could sleep. So I remember looking at the floor by the bathrooms, and I saw a piece of cardboard. So I grabbed the cardboard and I laid down. I was just laying down on a piece of cardboard in the middle of a park. And after about 45 minutes, I was starting to drift into sleep. And then I felt a little nudge on my leg. It was a security guard. And the security guard was like, hey man, hey, I'm sorry, bro, you can't sleep here. So, I got up and I walked away or whatever, but as I was walking around looking for another place to sleep, I was just thinking like, damn, I ain't even good enough to sleep in a park on the floor. Low point, man.
Say that last part again.
What last part?
The last part about when you got up, just take a minute to the
Okay. And I got up. I'm walking around just kind of looking for a place to lay. And I just remember thinking like, damn, I ain't even good enough to lay in the park on the floor. That goes to show you that you can make it through anything. And you could go as high as you possibly want. And during that era, I was trying to find myself, like there were certain times where if I was couch surfing on somebody's couch, then I felt lucky, because I wasn't out in the street or either in some program, sleeping in some used up bed, Couch surfing, I remember sitting there and I had so much belief in myself that as I was sitting there couch surfing, I would be on my Obama phone, right? And I'll be looking up Lamborghinis. People would come to me, it's like, why, how do you have the audacity to be researching Lamborghinis while you're couch surfing? I'm gonna tell you why. Because I always knew that I would become what I have become. I always knew that I would make it out of that vicious cycle that I was trapped in. You ever heard that statement, it's in me and not on me? I'm gonna tell you what that means. So a long time ago, I can't do that, man.
Action.
You ever heard that statement, it's in me, not on me? I'm gonna give you a perfect example. When I was a kid, I had a really good friend. He was one of my neighbors. So one of the days we went to break dance in the park. We used to call this Seaport Village, okay? Seaport Village in San Diego is a nice place where all the tourists and everybody walk around. It shows you the coast and everything like that. So me and my homeboy, we had to be 12 years old. We over there breakdancing, pop locking. And we had a little hat. And we turned the hat over and people was putting little quarters in it, little dollars in it. And for me, I kept breakdancing, and the more people put money in that hat, the more I started breakdancing. And finally, the whole hat was filled. It was filled up with money. And when it filled up with money, my homeboy ran and grabbed the hat and said, oh, let's go play. Let's go play. We got money now. We gonna go play. I looked at him like he was crazy. I said, go play where? Why? I said, we doing this. We keeping this. We gonna fill this up. And we got in a big fight over that. I remember my mom came and my mom picked up the hat and then she looked at us. She looked at my friends like, Antoine, when is it enough? And I just remember thinking to myself, At the early age, I had to hustle. I had to grind. You couldn't tell me to stop breakdancing, man. See, the difference between me and him is that, see, he wanted to get what he had and go spend it. I wanted to get it and go keep making more. And see, that's the difference of the mind state of a person that is a more ambitious level of thinking. That's all.
Take it back from, that's the difference.
You know, and that's the difference between the mind state of a person who has a different level of ambition. That's the only difference. It don't make what he wanted to do bad. You know, once you discover what it truly is that you love and that you're good at, you have to embody that. Once I figured out what it is that I wanted to do, I did everything. I ate it, I tasted it, I smelled it, I studied it, every single thing in my power. That's the true definition of embodiment. If you want to do something, you do every aspect, you completely max it out. You leave no room for doubt. You become the best as possible in it. If you got to film, record, write a book, write an ebook, sing a song, take a telegram, do a message, whatever you're doing, you do it to the fullest and to the max. And that's what I did.
Let's stop there. And action.
You know how I got into credit really is through embarrassment, shame. Basically, I was walking by a car dealership. I saw a sign that said, you know, your job is your credit. And I was on a bus. I was footing it. All these exotic cars and stuff you see now, I didn't have none of that. I had a bus pass. All right. So I remember saying like, oh man, I could get me a little car because I did have a job. I was working at T-Mobile. And I walked up in there, had my little money and stuff like that, had like $400 for a down payment. I picked the cheapest car on the lot. You know, back then they had those long applications. So I filled out the whole application, and then the guy came out the office, and I told this story on a TED Talk. The guy came out the office and he had his mouth covered up. And then next thing you know, he just started busting up laughing. And so people in the waiting room was all looking around like, what's funny? You know, let me in on the joke. And he just came out with it. He said, man, you got a 397 credit score. I said, a 397 credit score? It goes that low?